So I was reading in the Grace Notes that some of our members went ice fishing with the Scouts this last weekend. Yeah? Yeah? Sadly, after a whole day of fishing, no fish were caught. Luckily, this trip was just for fun, and catching fish wasn't the only way to enjoy the day on the ice. But imagine if it wasn't for fun, but for your livelihood. Imagine you spent the whole day working hard to get a bite, knowing that if you come home with nothing, there won't be food on the table or money to buy firewood for the furnace. Imagine how you might feel. Upset at yourself, annoyed with those fishing with you, afraid of what your spouse is going to say, and angry at this net you're cleaning that failed to do the one thing it was designed to do. So you can imagine how you might respond if some street preacher comes up to you and says, "Hey, can I make use of your boat? Mind rowing out a bit?" "Sure. I've been working all night, and now you want me to do this?" And then you row out, and maybe you pay attention to what the preacher is saying, though likely you're still focused on finishing your work with this blasted net, so that when the preacher finishes, you can pack up and go home and get some sleep. So you can imagine what you might do if the preacher, after his hour-long sermon, follows it up by saying, "Now could you put your boat out in the deep water and throw the net that you just finished cleaning back in the water for a catch?" Put out into the deep water. That's what Jesus says. The deep waters. That's where danger lies. That's where fear catches us off guard. That's where the troubles are. That's what the conflict in Ireland was called. The Tosa All City Reads book is about Ireland and the time after the Troubles. I mean, you know the song Bloody Sunday? That's about the Troubles. It wasn't a war, but a time when two political groups in Ireland couldn't trust each other, and people drowned in the hatred everyone had for one another. The divided political and nationalistic beliefs of Ireland threw the whole country into the deep end for nearly 3 decades. And that's where Jesus tells the disciples to go. Put out into the deep water. Or it's the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I just finished reading the part in his biography where, with Germany on the verge of war, he's able to go to America. Everyone is trying to get him out of Germany so that he'll be safe. They know he's a brilliant person, and they want him to be able to share his gifts with the world long after Germany's war is over. He'll be safe in America. But within less than a month in the United States, he hears Jesus saying to him, "Put out into the deep waters." I need you in the deep waters, Dietrich. That's where your nets will make a catch. And Dietrich listens. Less than 2 months in America, Bonhoeffer returns to Germany, arriving barely a month before World War II starts. And the rest, as they say, is history. Put out into the deep waters and let your nets down for a catch. Like the ministry done through Lutheran services in America and our local Lutheran social service offices. They put down their nets by creating women's shelters to catch those who are fleeing unsafe homes. They put down their nets by creating adoption agencies to catch vulnerable children and give them a family. They put down their nets in communities with refugees, helping our welcome guests in this country get settled, build a life, and become Americans. They put down their nets in long-term care facilities and housing initiatives, in counseling and job training, in healthcare and disability services. In Iowa, where I grew up, they put down their nets by creating a house for people living with disabilities. Locally, here, Lutheran Social Services in Wisconsin has served over 3,000 people in Milwaukee County just last year, putting themselves out in the deep waters of our neighborhoods to catch those who were drowning, who needed someone to save them. Put out into the deep water and let your nets down for a catch. And I'll tell you, So many times, the deep water is where God has shown up to save me. I know God goes out into the deep waters of my life whenever I find myself there. Just this last year, some things in my life got a bit heavy for me, and I was having a hard time coping. And then there came a night when I was playing music. That's one of the ways I pray, using music to express my soul. And I was feeling the weight of everything that I was carrying. And then I felt Christ put his hand on my shoulder. I didn't see Jesus, but I could feel the compassionate love through the grasp of his hand. Now, God's not always present to me that way. There have been long stretches of time when it's felt like God has been absent in my life, which is a normal experience. But that absence is only more acute when there are heavy things weighing you down. Sometimes they call this experience a dark night of the soul. And so when you feel Christ's hand on your shoulder, and you know Jesus is standing behind you, it means the world in those moments. It moves the soul. Oddly, I can't tell you that God's presence immediately solved anything for me. There wasn't a miraculous, suddenly everything is better moment. But since that night, the burden that had been weighing my heart down has begun lightening. Each day it weighs less and less. And these days it is almost gone. What that night was for me wasn't a sudden all better miracle, but a moment that healing began. It was less that Christ took the weight I was carrying off my shoulder, more like Christ removed that tiny sliver that caused everything else to swell so big. It's taking time for my body to heal, but the healing began at Jesus' touch. Where are the deep waters in your soul? When have you felt like you were drowning? What slivers have swollen beyond proportion? Let me tell you right now, I know from my own experience, God is going to show up in those deep waters. God is going to show up in those deep waters and save you. Maybe for you, it'll be a friend who shows up on a terrible day. It'll be a text message from your parents after a big fight that has you curled up in your room, and the message just says, "I love you. Please remember, I love you." It might be through a person, or it might be like it was for me, a sense of God's presence, a touch on your shoulder. However it shows up, whoever it comes through, it happens because God knows we are out in the deep, and God rose out there to save us. Do you remember the last time you were in the deep waters? Or the time before that? Do you remember how God showed up in those deep moments and brought you out of them? Trust God to do it again. In Ireland, the Troubles are still drowning people today. Teenagers, all of whom were born more than a decade after the Troubles ended, are still fighting with each other along the same lines that divided their parents. Here in Milwaukee, there's a program called the Ulster Project. It's designed to bring a handful of teenagers from both sides of the Troubles to neutral territory here in the U.S., and along with the teenagers who are hosting them, to show them that there's another path than the one of hatred and violence. One of our families here at Mount Zion is hoping to take up the invitation to go out into the deep waters of the Troubles and let down their nets to help one of these teens escape the hatred that has consumed their community. And God invites you too, out into the deep. Where are the deep waters around here? Maybe it's Tosa West, which I recently saw was rated as the 15th most ghetto high school in Wisconsin. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, that sounds like deep waters, doesn't it? Maybe it's Washington Park by Reformation Lutheran, where the black community gathers in one of the most racially segregated cities in the nation. Maybe the deep waters for you are family gatherings, where the divisions created by political views are the most apparent because unlike any other part of your life, you don't get to choose who you're related to. Wherever the deep waters are for you, listen to Jesus' invitation. Put out into the deep waters and let your nets down for a catch. Jesus says, "Come, follow me, and I will make your life one where you put out nets that rescue people from the deep waters of their souls. Come, follow me, even into the deep, and I will teach you how to save drowning souls the way God has saved you." Let all God's people say amen.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to like if you heard good news and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest message. Peace be with you.